Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly behind the rice paper doors of feudal Japan, where a whisper can ruin a reputation, and even your prettiest kimono is more armor than art. You're not a samurai warrior, you're something arguably harder. You're his wife. And from the moment you wake up in that tatami-lined room, incense curling in the air, and your spine aching from sleeping upright to preserve your hairstyle, you know you're not in charge of anything. Not your day, not your household, not even your face. You're 17, maybe 16. Your family arranged this marriage because your new husband's father is influential, close to the shogun, in fact. Doesn't matter that you'd never met the guy until your wedding day. All you know is that his armor gleamed impressively in the sun, and he didn't say a word to you during the ceremony. That's fine. Words are dangerous. Smiles even more so. You've been told repeatedly to bow deeper and speak less, so you bow. A lot. Your formal education, which includes poetry, music, and how not to make men feel uncomfortable, is mostly ornamental. It's the invisible syllabus you're following. Now manage the estate if he's away. Don't contradict the steward, never question his instructions. You aren't even allowed to show too much joy or too much sorrow. Emotions. Those are for kabuki actors. You shuffle through the house in silk socks that you dare not tear, and if one hair slips from your oiled coiffure, it's a moral failing. You're beautiful, yes, but not for your own sake. You're a reflection of your husband's discipline. That's right, your beauty is his achievement. Feel free to scream into a porcelain teacup. Quietly. By the way, your kimono, it's exquisite and heavy. With each additional layer, it's like you're being dressed not for comfort, but for combat against public judgment, mother-in-law critiques, and the slow erosion of self. The embroidery on your sleeves tells stories you're not allowed to speak aloud. One wrong gesture in public, and you risk embarrassing your entire clan. You've become fluent in silent messages, how deep you bow, how long you pause before pouring sake, when your eyes should be lowered, and when they should vanish entirely. Historians still argue whether the women of the samurai class had more agency than their peasant counterparts. Some claim these women managed estates and wielded influence behind the scenes. Others argue that agency meant nothing when you couldn't leave your home unaccompanied without scandal blooming faster than plum blossoms in spring. Still, there's a certain prestige. People envy your silk, your lacquered hairpins, your access to education, but they don't see the hours of kneeling the pain in your lower back, the endless performance that is your life. You learn early on to suppress even your sneezes, lest someone accuse you of seeking attention. One fringe anecdote. Some women used to swallow tiny stones to discipline the stomach and preserve a ladylike waist, because nothing says virtue like intestinal suffering. And let's not forget the poetry. Oh yes, you're expected to write verses, and they'd better not be cheerful. Haikus that evoke longing, absence, fleeting cherry blossoms basically make every syllable bleed. You smile for visitors. You fan yourself modestly. You walk exactly the way your etiquette instructor showed you, knees-close posture. Straight eyes cast down, like a woman who knows her place. Because you do. So first day, as a samurai wife, you've cried twice, smiled once accidentally, and now you're practicing the art of polite invisibility. Think you'll make it to lunchtime. You didn't choose your husband. That decision was made in the quiet hush of a tatami room months before the wedding, where your father, your uncle, and a monk with suspiciously well-trimmed facial hair sipped tea and decided your future. Not that they asked you, of course. Your opinions are like paper umbrellas in a storm, decorative and easily destroyed. Your groom. Let's just say his personality is mostly stern silence, punctuated by throat clearing. You learned more about him from the embroidered family crest on his cloak than from any actual conversation. The union wasn't about love, it was about alliance. Clan alliances, political favors, land security. Your currency dressed in brocade. Your wedding was beautiful in that kind of haunting, blink and you miss it way. The ceremony involved ritual sake sharing and multiple bows, and you nearly fainted from holding your breath through the whole thing. He never looked you in the eye, which in samurai culture means either deep respect or complete indifference. You're still not sure. Marriage in this world is a contract, not a courtship. Love poems may be later if he survives the next campaign and remembers your name. Right now, he's busy polishing swords and reciting the code of Bushido with more affection than he's ever shown to your existence. Bushido, by the way, does not apply to you. There's no official code for wives, just an unspoken expectation to be obedient, graceful, and eerily quiet. Think of yourself as an emotional air freshener, pleasant to have around, barely noticeable, and replaced if defective. Your role is to serve your husband's family, not your own interests. You've said goodbye to your childhood home forever. No return visits, no sleepovers, no "hey mom, remember when" moments. That bridge burned the second your father said yes and signed the scroll. You're in a new clan now, and you'll be judged on how well you represent it. Which is to say, how invisible and useful you can be at the same time. Historians still argue whether women like you had any leverage in marriage negotiations. Some evidence suggests upper-class women occasionally influenced match choices behind closed doors, dropping subtle hints to parents or priests. But subtle hint in this world is the equivalent of whispering through a wall made of stone during a thunderstorm. Don't get your hopes up. You're instructed to keep your tone soft and your opinion softer. Even your hobbies must align with your husband's image. Enjoy painting only if it's landscapes that flatter his family estate. Like calligraphy, only if the characters say something flattering about Bushido. And yet there's a strange duality. Your wedding gift included a tanto, a ceremonial dagger elegantly wrapped in silk. It's both a sign of trust and a quiet warning. If your husband dies and you bring shame upon his memory, well, the blade is there for a reason. No pressure. Your husband finally acknowledges you on your second night together. He says you pour sake well. You nearly cry from the compliment, which is both touching and deeply depressing. You've trained your whole life to be perfect at pouring fermented rice alcohol and maintaining a gentle smile while doing it. Mission accomplished. It's not that romance is impossible, it's just irrelevant. If love blooms, it's considered a pleasant surprise, like finding an extra pickled plum in your lunchbox. But mostly you're expected to bear heirs and bear it all with quiet elegance. You begin learning his habits. The number of times he clears his throat before entering a room. How he prefers his slippers placed at the entrance. Which days he sharpens his katana, and which days he visits the temple. It's like learning to live beside a thunderstorm, constant, unpredictable, and a little dangerous to touch. Still romantic, no candlelit dinners, no strolls under cherry blossoms. Just strategy meetings in which you smile, nod, and refill the teacups like you aren't screaming internally. But hey, at least the kimono's still fabulous. Your mornings start before the rooster crows, and no, that's not a poetic exaggeration. Someone literally shakes you awake before the birds dare peep. You slide out of your futon in silence, bow to the household shrine. Always bow, first always, and begin your slow transformation into someone your mother-in-law won't criticize today. You thought being a samurai's wife meant sipping tea and waving from balconies. Instead, you're a one-woman logistics department, emotional regulator, and unpaid etiquette consultant. Before your husband's armor clangs its way through the compound, you've supervised rice steaming, instructed junior servants, and double-checked that no one placed the incense burner on the wrong side of the altar again. Heaven help the maid who mixes up north and south. Now here's the fun bit: your mother-in-law lives with you, and she's got the emotional warmth of a winter scroll painting. Everything you do, from folding linens to how you pronounce ocha, is filtered through her glacial stare. She's like a judgmental bonsai tree, rooted silent and oddly terrifying. If she says acceptable, you practically feel like you've won a war. If she sighs, you contemplate the ceremonial dagger. Domestic life in a samurai household is a performance art. There's a script, and heaven forbid you improvise. Your main job, ensuring harmony. Not actual peace, just the illusion of it. If a servant misplaces a lacquer box, you apologize. If your husband forgets your name during a shrine offering you laugh it off. If your child sneezes during meditation practice, you somehow accept responsibility for their respiratory system. But behind the shoji screens, you're the silent engine. Meals must be timed with military precision. No loud chewing. No spicy dishes unless your husband requests them. No garlic because apparently the smell might distract him while he's contemplating the art of dying honorably. Historians still argue whether women in samurai households had real power or just ceremonial titles. Some say the Okusan lady of the house wielded considerable influence over domestic economics and servants. Others believe it was more symbolic, like being made captain of a ship with no sails, no rudder, and a crew that doesn't speak your language. Here's the part they don't engrave into the scrolls: you're lonely. Women like you are expected to avoid friendships that could be construed as disloyal. Even writing too many letters to your cousin back home might raise suspicions. Your diary becomes your confidant unless, of course, your diary is ever found. In which case, you've basically written your own trial transcript. Let's talk about leisure time, assuming you ever get it. You're allowed to pursue refined arts. That means no wild dancing or questionable poetry. You practice ink painting while making sure every stroke follows prescribed styles. You play the koto, a 13-stringed zither, but never too loudly. Laughter should be like mist, soft, fleeting, and ideally non-existent. Your husband, meanwhile, attends poetry salons and martial training with his peers. You wait to hear if he returns injured victorious or not at all. You're not allowed to show too much emotion either way. Stoic grace is the name of the game. Even when your insides feel like they've been stir-fried in soy sauce and left out in the sun. Here's a fringe tidbit. Some samurai wives were trained in dagger combat, not to fight beside their husbands, but to protect their honor in the event of household intrusion or failure. Basically, you're expected to defend the family name with the same blade you're supposed to dust every Thursday. The expectations don't stop even when you're sick. Fever smile politely and apologize for any disruption your coughing caused the servants. Menstrual cramps. There's a corner of the compound for that. Enjoy your quiet exile. Pregnancy. Congrats, you now get to birth future warriors and resume dinner prep by week 3. Still, you keep your back straight and your kimono unwrinkled. Because if you falter, the shame doesn't just fall on you, it stains the household. And honor, as they constantly remind you, is more fragile than a porcelain teacup in an earthquake. You hold the scroll in your hands like it's on fire, because it might as well be. It's your husband's latest command, a directive from his daimyo to ride out by dawn and put down some skirmish somewhere you've never heard of. Again, you don't flinch. That's the role. When your husband goes off to war, you do not beg. You do not cry. You pack. Armor polished. Saddle gear inspected. His lunchbox. Yes, samurai get those too. An artfully packed bundle of rice balls and dried fish, hand-wrapped in embroidered cloth you finished at midnight. Because what's better in battle than knowing your wife folded your napkin into a lotus blossom? He leaves without fanfare. Samurai are big on stoicism and small on goodbye hugs. You bow. He nods. You both pretend you're not imagining what his body might look like when or if it returns. You linger after he's gone, breathing in the scent of his horse sweat and pine soap because that's all you get. So what happens when you're left behind? You become the captain of a ship that's half sinking and half invisible. You now manage everything. Household accounts, food storage, staff discipline, festivals, grain taxes, the annual poetry contest. Oh, and your in-laws who act like their son entrusted you with a national treasure, when really he left you with a to-do list longer than a Buddhist sutra. But here's where things get truly fun. If your husband dies and doesn't have a male heir, you're in the hot seat. Some women remarry into the clan to preserve alliances. Others are shuttled off like diplomatic packages to different households. If you're too mouthy or too barren, you may find yourself quietly retired to a nunnery. Not for spiritual growth, just polite exile with incense. Historians still argue whether samurai wives were expected to commit junshi ritual suicide if their husbands died. Some did, but many more just weren't given the choice. The pressure was real, though. If your husband died dishonorably and you didn't follow him in death, people talked. A lot. Gossip was the medieval internet. Of course, if your husband survives, he comes home to rest and brag about his blade work, while you politely ignore the smell of blood that still clings to his sleeves. You smile, nod, refill his tea, and pretend you're not mentally tallying the laundry. You can't ask questions. You shouldn't ask questions, especially not about that locket in his travel pouch. Probably belonged to some noble widow whose castle he liberated. Right. Here's a deliciously bizarre fringe fact. During long campaigns, samurai often carried small dolls or tokens shaped like loved ones for luck. That means your husband might have carved a tiny U out of wood, then kept it next to his dagger. Romantic or unsettling. The line is blurry. And you back home don't even get that. You sit by the lantern reading sutras aloud to keep your voice in practice, because women who speak too softly are accused of laziness, and women who speak too loudly are suspected of ambition. Heaven forbid you become memorable. You keep the family shrine spotless because the ancestors are always watching. You oversee seasonal offerings, supervise harvest rituals, and correct the calligraphy on New Year's charms. You write letters to officials on your husband's behalf, using ink that stains your hands for days. If you slip up, the embarrassment isn't yours alone. The clan suffers. The family name stumbles. Your father-in-law might have a coughing fit just from shame. And yet, amid the never-ending domestic war, you keep going. You walk the gardens in silence each morning, eyes scanning for weeds. You write haiku about mist and moss, though your mind is full of dread. You teach your children the way of the bow and brush, knowing each could be summoned to serve before they've lost their baby teeth. Because in the end, your role is as much armor as his breastplate. It's silence forged into steel expectation, lacquered into grace. You smile, bow, and pour the tea, each act a little ritual of resilience. The letter arrives like a ghost, no seal, no flourish, just dry parchment folded by trembling hands. A distant cousin sends word your husband's lord has been overthrown. There's a whisper of rebellion. The court is fractured. He is accused of what treason, disloyalty. It's all vague, and intentionally so, which leaves you in the worst position of all, frozen in place, accused by association with no script to follow. You take no chances. That night you burn half your husband's belongings, anything with crests, names, or allegiances. The old war banners become kindling. The family record scroll buried in a jar beneath the garden's west wall. You sleep fully dressed, dagger under your pillow. That embroidered rice cloth now used to muffle your footsteps. Because here's the uncomfortable truth, being a samurai's wife wasn't just about honoring your husband. It was about absorbing the consequences of his life, especially when they collapsed on top of you like a bad roof tile. The door creaks open at dawn, and a government official enters, just one, with a blank expression and a list. Your name is on it. Your children's names are too. You bow low as if that might erase you from the parchment. It doesn't. In some cases, the wives of disgraced samurai were taken in for questioning. In others, they were sent to remote villages for reflection. A few, if they had powerful relatives or valuable dowries, were quietly married off again to salvage political connections. And those with no safety net, they vanished into history like tea steam, unrecorded, unmourned. You try to stay useful. You offer the official rice sweet cakes, courtesy. He accepts nothing. His eyes flick to the ink stains on your fingers, sign of a woman who writes too much, thinks too freely. Not a good look. Historians still argue whether women like you had any say in their own fate during such crises. The records are patchy, most preserved by the very men who erased your name when it became inconvenient. What survives are hints of poem scratched onto temple wood, a folded kimono left at a shrine, a court log that mentions an unnamed wife. You prepare for exile. You pack with care, not sentiment. Warm robes, inkstone, 2 chopsticks. Your daughter cries silently. You braid her hair tighter, not out of love, but necessity. Unkempt children attract suspicion. Weak children get left behind. The irony. You've done everything right. You've bowed, prayed, poured, birthed, stitched, taught, translated, stood still when told, and vanished when needed. But the moment your husband stumbles, the shame spills over your lap like overturned sake. And still somehow you're expected to endure it all with grace. That's the unspoken creed of samurai womanhood: survive with elegance, suffer in silence, and if necessary, disappear with dignity. Here's a strange tidbit for you. Some women who were exiled after their husband's political fall went on to become Buddhist nuns. Not necessarily out of spiritual awakening, mind you, but because nunhood granted legal protection. Think of it as ancient Japan's version of witness relocation, but with more incense and fewer questions. You reach the mountain pass days later. It's raining. The sky droops like wet silk. The official accompanying you finally relents and lets you stop at a roadside temple. The monks offer you tea that tastes like moss and memory. You sip slowly, pretending it doesn't taste better than your old life. That night, as you lie awake on a straw mat, you think of all the other wives scattered across the empire. How many are walking these same muddy paths? How many are carving poetry into the undersides of temple steps just to prove they once existed? You fall asleep to the sound of dripping Eve's ink-stained hands curled under your cheek. You don't dream of revenge. You dream of invisibility, of silence so wide it swallows history. Morning breaks like a cracked rice bowl, quiet, uneven, a little sharp at the edges. You rise before the sun, because habits die harder than husbands. The temple bell tolls low and slow, echoing across damp courtyards, filled with sandalwood smoke and half-asleep monks. Your exile isn't dramatic. It's bureaucratic. You're told to remain within a certain province, report to local officials monthly, and devote yourself to reflection. Which sounds poetic, but really means don't cause trouble, don't speak up, and absolutely don't try to return home. You make yourself useful, of course. You help copy sutras in the temple's scriptorium. Your brushwork is elegant, too elegant. Soon you're asked to teach girls from nearby farms how to read and write. Their fathers pretend not to approve, but they keep showing up with ink sticks and offerings of barley cakes. Education is dangerous, apparently, unless it's free and in exile. You don't speak of your husband, not in name, not even in memory. To do so would be to resurrect something the world has already cremated. Instead, you fold his story into the margins of scrolls and the stitching of robes into tiny haiku that no one reads but the wind. And then there's the mail, or what passes for it. Letters smuggled in on rice paper tucked between pages of sacred texts. You get updates. One of your children is safe in Kyoto studying medicine. Another has been taken in by distant relatives. You exhale not quite relief, not quite grief, just momentary warmth in a season of cold fog. Historians still argue whether samurai wives in exile could truly start over, or if they lived in suspended animation, like ghosts given chores. The records show some remarried, others entered religious life, and a few became local legends, mysterious women who whispered old court poems to themselves and terrified children with tales of palace intrigue. You suspect you're becoming one of those. Here's an odd little tidbit. In some regions, exiled noblewomen were tasked with preserving obscure dances and ritual songs that had fallen out of court fashion. You end up teaching 3 girls how to perform the Crane of Dusk, a chant meant to please mountain spirits. It mostly involves flapping your sleeves and pretending to cry silently. You're great at it. Your days settle into rhythm. Morning sutras, midday calligraphy, evening tea, with the head monk who's far too fond of riddles. One night he asks if a woman falls in a palace and no one records her name. Did she ever wear silk? You want to answer with a laugh, but instead you whisper only on the inside. He nods, like that means something. Maybe it does. Your exile isn't miserable, not exactly, but it is small, compressed, like being folded into one of your own ink-stained envelopes. And yet, there's an unexpected freedom here. No lord to please, no sons to groom into tiny warriors, no court to judge your bowing angle. Just you, your ink and the mountain air that smells like wet pine and old secrets. You begin to write for yourself again, poems that don't rhyme, stories that don't end well, letters addressed to no one in particular. You press them into the hollows of tree trunks or float them down river on lotus leaves. It doesn't matter who reads them. What matters is that you're writing at all. One afternoon, you catch your reflection in a bucket of well water and barely recognize the woman staring back. She's older, yes, but also somehow more real. Less costume, more skin. You smile. She doesn't. Fair enough. She has her reasons. Remember that embroidered napkin from years ago, the one you folded into a lotus. You still carry the pattern in your head. Tonight you recreate it out of dried leaves and place it on your windowsill like an offering. For what? Not for your husband. Not for your past. Maybe for yourself. For surviving. Rain arrives in a slow, misty curtain, soaking the thatch of your roof and the cuffs of your sleeves before you've even stepped outside. But you're used to damp now. Used to squelching shoes and that earthy temple mud smell that never really leaves your hems. You wipe your hands on your robe and continue binding scrolls with deliberate care, every knot, a small act of control in a life otherwise left to fate. One of the young girls you've been teaching has taken to calling you sensei with a mix of awe and mischief. She's 12 and already better with a brush than most scribes you knew in the palace. You correct her posture and she corrects your accent. Apparently your Kyoto lilt sounds funny out here. You both laugh. That too is a novelty. And then something shifts. Not a storm, not a scandal, just a letter. A real one. Sealed with the crest of a clan you'd thought long extinguished. You open it with trembling fingers and read slowly, as if the words might vanish if rushed. It's an offer. Not for your return, let's not be ridiculous, but for a position. They want you to come to a nearby town and oversee the education of a daimyo's daughters. You stare at the paper for a long time, then fold it into fourths and place it under your teacup like it might sprout roots. Historians still argue whether women in exile were allowed to refuse such requests. Officially, yes. Socially, about as optional as volunteer guard duty at the city gates. Still, you ask for a night to think. You sit beneath the ancient cedar behind the temple, its roots curling like dragon tails around the mossy stones. You remember when your world was full of embroidered silks, porcelain cups, and the clink of armor brushing past you in narrow palace halls. Now it's ink-stained fingers, and the sound of a girl reciting poems she barely understands. Which version of you is more real? There's a fringe fact you once read in an old chronicle. Samurai wives, when widowed or exiled, sometimes became onabugeisha, female warriors trained with the naginata. It's unclear how many actually fought, or if it was just a poetic flourish. But tonight, you feel like one of them, even without a weapon. Just standing still and choosing feels like defiance. You accept the offer, of course, not because you want to return to anything there is no home left, but because you can't sit by a brazier teaching the same kanji forever. Movement is survival. Change, despite all its teeth, is your only companion now. The journey is short, but jarring. The town is louder, the house colder, the children spoiled. But they are also curious. One girl asks you what exile means. You tell her, it's when the world moves on without you, but you follow anyway. She looks confused, and you let her stay that way. Some things are better learned slowly. You carry yourself like the shadow of a lady-in-waiting, all grace and deliberate restraint. But inside, you are stitched together with sarcasm, stubbornness, and a threadbare kind of pride. You keep your poems in a lacquered box by your bedside. Some nights you add new ones, even if they're just lists of things you miss. The sound of sandals on polished floors, the scent of camellias in spring, your husband's laugh when he was still too young to be cruel. Remember that temple riddle, the one about silk and silence? You're beginning to think the monk was wrong. Even if no one records your name, you were still real. You bled, you wrote, you fought in the quiet way women do without swords, but never unarmed. You catch glimpses of your old self sometimes in polished bowls or lantern glass. She looks tired. Yes, but not defeated. You nod at her, she nods back. You've made peace or something close enough to pass for it under moonlight. And now, at the edges of this new place, you find a sliver of power. Not the kind that rides horseback into glory, but the subtler kind authority in the tilt of your chin, the rhythm of your calligraphy, the fact that grown men ask you questions now and actually listen to the answers. You're still a samurai's wife, technically. But now that title feels less like a prison and more like a ghost story you survived. The years peel away one careful page at a time. You start to recognize the rhythms of your new town, the carpenters sharpening their planes at dawn, the distant gong of the temple bell marking each mealtime, like punctuation in a poem. You've stopped expecting letters from Kyoto. Even the ache in your chest that once flared every time you saw a courier's red sash has dulled into a quiet, manageable kind of nostalgia. You live in a borrowed house near the north wall, hemmed in by plum trees and rumors. The townspeople still whisper about you. The exiled lady with the ink-stained sleeves. The widow who teaches girls to write as if it matters. One fishmonger swears you're a spy for the shogun, while a boy at the shrine is convinced you're a ghost. You find both ideas equally flattering. Your hair has silvered, not evenly just enough to make you look distinguished if the lighting is dim and your posture good. You don't dye it. You like the way it makes your students sit up straighter when you enter a room. Authority comes in many forms, and age is a convenient costume. You still dream of your husband sometimes. Not the charming boy with the crooked smile and reckless poems, but the older one, the one who stared past you at court functions, like you were furniture with opinions. Historians still argue whether the wives of samurai wielded any real influence. On paper, they did. In practice, well, it depends on which paper and whose brush. But there's a power in being forgotten too. With no one expecting anything from you, you finally get to choose. You don't write odes to emperors or epics in praise of clan glory. You write small things, observations, gossip in poetic form, the way plum blossoms curl in rain. You teach your students to notice the way the ink runs slightly when it's humid. You tell them to pause before each line and ask, does this sentence need to exist? Most of the time, it doesn't. That's the secret. Your old robes are stored in a cedar chest beneath your bed. Every so often, you take one out just to feel the fabric. It still smells faintly of sandalwood and ashes. You could wear them again if you wanted. You could step into the next town and let the silk whisper your status. But you don't. You prefer your plain robes, your calloused hands, your reputation as the woman who corrects even the mayor's grammar. One day a new girl joins your class. She's quiet, stubborn, and too clever by half. When she hands you her first poem, you pause. It's good. Unpolished but raw in a way that pinches. You look up and she's watching you, not nervously but like she's measuring your response. You smile and hand it back with a single word. Rewrite. And just like that, the cycle begins again. You have no legacy. Not really. Your name won't be carved into any monument. The shrine won't honor you during festival. But when your students write, they will echo you. When they teach their daughters, your voice will filter through centuries as faint as incense, but just as persistent. Remember that monk at the temple? You saw him again last spring. Older, rounder, more amused than ever. You told him you figured out the answer to his riddle. He asked, which one you replied? All of them. He laughed and handed you a rice cake. Your days are quiet now, but not empty. There's a rhythm to them, like a brush gliding across papyrus. You've turned exile into something oddly elegant, less a punishment, more a secret garden. Only you know how to tend. So when someone asks, as they sometimes do, what it's like to be a samurai's wife, you just raise an eyebrow and say, "Which century are we talking about?" Then you walk away before they can answer. You've earned that exit. And now, as the lanterns flicker low, and the night deepens into a blue-black hush, you set down your brush, close your scroll, and let your eyes drift shut. The world goes on louder than before. But here in this quiet house behind the north wall, a different kind of strength has taken root. Now slow your breath. Unclench your jaw. Let your shoulders drop as if the weight of history itself just slipped off your back. The candle flickers softly beside you, casting long shadows that stretch, but never quite touch. Whatever troubles you carried into this moment, let them dissolve like old ink in warm water. You've walked through silence, exile, and ink-stained memory. And now you rest wiser than before. The world can wait. Close your eyes, listen to the hush, and let the night hold you gently. Sweet dreams. Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly behind the gates of a place most medieval folk feared more than death itself, a leper colony. The stench hits first, a strange mix of damp rot, boiled herbs, and something you can't quite place like wet burlap left too long in the rain. A bell clangs gently near your head. You didn't hear it until now because your body's so sore, your mind is hazy, and honestly you've just walked 10 miles in shoes that might as well be tree bark. A man approaches. No, not a man, more like a silhouette wrapped in sackcloth with a cowl pulled over most of his face. He doesn't touch you. Instead, he points with a stick to the muddy gap in the stone wall behind him. That's the entrance. No fanfare, no warm soup waiting. Welcome to your new home, where you'll sleep beside other outcasts, eat from a communal pot, and bathe. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, you need a diagnosis. You're ushered to a small wooden hut reeking of vinegar and anxiety. The physician, which is generous since he's really more priest than doctor, asks you to undress. He doesn't touch you either. He squints, mutters Latin, and makes the sign of the cross over the red splotches on your arm. Leprosy, or what he thinks is leprosy. Historians still argue whether half the people in medieval leper colonies had Hansen's disease at all. Many may have just had eczema or lupus. Too bad for you, the bell's been rung. You're in. Before they let you stay, you're given a new outfit. It's, well, let's call it functional. A robe made of thick wool, not washed since who knows when, and a hood big enough to hide most of your face. You also receive 2 essential accessories, a wooden clapper and a bell. No, not for festive purposes. You're required to make noise wherever you go to alert the clean folks of your presence. Think of it like medieval social distancing with audio. The colony itself is a fenced cluster of huts, a chapel and a garden patch that looks like it lost a fight with a flock of sheep. You're assigned a bed, or rather a straw mat over a slab of wood inside a low hut, with 7 other lepers, some of whom are already watching you, judging you, maybe even sniffing. It's hard to tell if it's you that stinks, or if this is just what life smells like now. Your stomach growls. Don't get your hopes up. Dinner is a bowl of watery barley mush that's somehow both overcooked and still crunchy. One toothless woman slurps hers while telling you completely seriously that God sent her here as a test. The man next to her whispers that he was cursed by a jilted lover. You nod. You won't be the weirdest person here by a long shot. That night you try to sleep. Between the wheezing coughing and the rat that boldly scuttles across your foot, it's not easy. The cold seeps into your bones. You curl tighter. And just when you start to drift, a distant moan echoes across the compound. It's followed by the slow clang of a bell. Someone died. You'll get used to that sound. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I always love seeing those comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up to frost on your blanket, and the undeniable fact that you're not dreaming. You're actually in a medieval leper colony, and you'll be staying a while, maybe forever. The morning starts with coughing. Not just yours, though your throat feels like it's lined with old parchment, but a whole chorus of hacking, snorting, and groaning from every corner of your shared hovel. There's a rhythm to it, like a horrible medieval symphony. Someone lets out a wet sneeze. You instinctively flinch, forgetting for a moment that catching something worse is unlikely at this point. You sit up and meet the eyes of your new neighbors. There's no privacy here. The woman who talked about divine tests last night is already at the door, muttering prayers as she leans on a carved stick. Next to her, a man with no visible nose tightens a strip of cloth around what's left of his foot. He grins at you. His teeth are mostly gone. He has an unsettling habit of humming tunelessly through his gums. A small boy, no more than 10, sits in the corner, whittling a stick. You wonder what he did to end up here. Some colonies accepted children, especially those born to infected parents. Others dumped them on the outskirts and hoped the church would pick them up. Historians still debate whether children in these communities were genuinely cared for or merely tolerated. Judging by the boy's filthy tunic and the way he eyes your crust of bread, you're leaning toward the latter. Breakfast is the same as dinner, beige bland, and probably older than you are. You eat fast anyway. Hunger does that. The man with no nose, whose name is apparently Thomas, tells you how the last newcomer tried to escape and was caught a mile down the road. They branded his cheek with a cross before dragging him back. He still walks funny, Thomas says, chuckling, like he just told a joke. You do not laugh. Then comes the introductions. Kind of. No one formally lines up to shake your hand. Not that there are many hands left intact, but throughout the day, more of them size you up. There's Brother Edric, a former monk who still insists on leading morning prayers, even though his voice sounds like gravel in a bucket. There's Maeve, who swears she used to be a healer and can still feel the humors. And then there's Jacques. You meet Jacques when he barges into the hovel to scream at the others for taking his turn at the garden. He's tall, surprisingly muscular, and has only one functioning eye which seems to scan for trouble, like a hawk watching mice. Everyone goes quiet when he speaks. You don't ask questions. Later, Thomas tells you Jacques was a knight before he caught the mark. Now he runs the colony's schedule like a captain of a ship no one asked to board. You're given chores, of course. Everyone does something. There's no such thing as a free bed, even if it's covered in fleas. You're assigned to water the herbs behind the chapel. It sounds easy, but the well is 40 paces away, and the bucket leaks. It's a cruel joke, and you suspect Thomas volunteered you for it. As you pass by other huts, you notice how each one has its own scent. Some are sharp, like vinegar and boiled onions. Others are sweeter, disturbingly so. There's a reason for that. Many here rub themselves with herbs and even flowers to mask the smell of rotting flesh. A few even tuck lavender in their sleeves, as if perfume can distract from the damage. One quirky tidbit: some medieval folk believed sweet smells could literally fight off disease. Lemon balm, mint rose petals, you name it. If it grew in a monastery garden, someone here's probably smeared it on their armpits. A group gathers around a tattered scroll near the chapel. It's a list of names. At the top, those who died this week. Below, those who'll lead next week's procession. You spot your name. Apparently, you're expected to join a psalm walk through the compound tomorrow. Bell ringing included. You sigh. Just yesterday, you were walking through a market square. Now you'll be parading like a ghost in a funeral you didn't agree to attend. Back in your hovel, night falls early. You huddle under your wool robe, which now feels more like a prison uniform than a blessing. You try not to think about the moans outside, or the fact that someone in the corner is softly muttering the same prayer over and over, like they're trying to outrun a nightmare. And you haven't even met the barber surgeon yet. You wake before the bell, your back aching from straw that's compacted into something close to stone. Someone's already outside, shuffling barefoot through the mud. You can hear the faint scrape of wooden clappers echoing from a nearby hut, someone trying to clear their throat without getting too close to the others. It's procession day. Lucky you. First you dress. That is, you throw on the same robe that hasn't dried since yesterday's downpour. Damp wool is truly a medieval miracle. It manages to trap both heat and misery. You step outside and immediately regret it. Rain again, but that doesn't matter. You're expected to attend the prayer walk. Attendance isn't optional, even if you're missing a foot. They'll just make you ride in a wheelbarrow. At the chapel, a few dozen residents gather some already swinging incense holders, others holding palm branches or wooden crucifixes. Brother Edric leads the chants, his voice wheezing through ancient hymns that no one really understands anymore. You just try to keep up your bell, gently ringing with every limp and shuffle. The procession moves in a slow circle around the compound, past the crumbling garden wall, the shallow burial field, and the pigs. Yes, pigs. You hadn't noticed them before. They're scrappy and thin, rooting around the compost heaps for discarded turnip skins, and occasionally things you'd rather not identify. Some colonies let pigs roam free to eat trash. One quirky tidbit, there's a medieval case where pigs allegedly ate the remains of a leper who died unnoticed. Nobody could agree whether it was a scandal or just efficient waste removal. By mid-morning, the walk ends, and you're left standing in front of the chapel while Edric drones on about suffering penance and eternal reward. The speech is longer than breakfast and twice as dry. Your legs ache. Someone coughs violently behind you and spits into the mud. You flinch, just reflex at this point. When you're finally dismissed, you head toward your task, helping prepare the noon meal. Today, it's a thin soup of onions, barley, and something labeled meat, though no one wants to know what it used to be. A woman named Agatha oversees the cooking. She has one eye permanently closed from some old infection, but she slices onions like a soldier wields a sword. As you chop root vegetables, she tells you stories, some funny, some horrible, and some you're pretty sure she's making up entirely. Used to serve in a bishop's kitchen, she says, until I coughed during Lent. Bad timing. Lunch is served communally. Everyone eats squatting on low wooden stools or sitting cross-legged on damp earth. You don't get your own bowl, just your own spoon, which you're expected to carry everywhere like a knight's sword. Historians still argue whether these eating arrangements were meant to promote equality or simply reduce dishwashing. After lunch, you're told to attend therapy. Don't get excited. It's not the good kind. This therapy involves rubbing a mysterious paste, some combination of animal fat, ash, and herbs into your sores, while the healer chants prayers. The woman administering it says it was passed down by her grandmother, who cured a goat of boils once. That's her entire resume. To be fair, medieval medicine wasn't all superstition. Some leper colonies included rudimentary bathing stations, which helped with hygiene, sort of. And yes, some herbal treatments had real antibacterial effects. But the line between help and harm was blurry. For example, one common treatment involved burying your limbs in warm manure to draw out the bad humors. You make a note to avoid that one. Later in the day, you're given a surprise break. You spend it lying in a patch of sun that briefly cuts through the clouds. Your skin soaks up the warmth like a plant. For just a moment, it feels almost normal. Then Thomas walks by and casually tells you the last guy who took a nap in that spot got bitten by something and lost a toe. You sit up. Evening falls quickly, with a sky the color of bruised plums. You help carry firewood to the hovel, though your arms feel like noodles. Inside, the mood is calm. Someone's telling a joke in the corner. You can't quite catch it, but you hear laughter. Not bitter, real. Maybe that's what life is here, ugly, hard, and strange, but sometimes weirdly human. Still, you can't shake the thought that this is just your new normal. No visitors, no letters, no way out. And the worst part, you haven't even been here a full week. You don't see the barber surgeon right away. You hear him first whistling a cheery tune that sounds utterly out of place in a leper colony. The melody drifts through the air like a bird that took a wrong turn and landed in a swamp. Then he appears, stepping out from behind the chapel, with a leather satchel in one hand and a bone-handled knife in the other. His name is Lambert, and he's not technically a doctor. He's more of a handyman for the human body. Need a tooth pulled. He'll yank it. Boil lanced, no problem. Limb infected beyond saving, though. He has a saw and a prayer. You meet him up close when your foot begins to swell. At first it's just sore, probably from hauling buckets and standing too long in wet shoes. But by the next day, it's puffy red and hotter than your soup. Lambert takes one look and says, "Ah." The foot's angry. You're told to sit on a stool while he rummages through his satchel, pulling out tools that look like torture devices. There's a pair of rusted tongs, some string ajar of something brown and sticky, and a curved blade that he calls Old Whistler. He douses the foot in wine, cheap stuff, barely fit to drink, and mutters something that might be a prayer, or might be his lunch order. You're too scared to ask. The pain is memorable. There's no anesthesia here unless you count biting down on a rag that smells like old socks. He scrapes out the infection while humming that same off-key tune, and when it's over, he pats your knee like a farmer comforting livestock. As a treatment, he prescribes you garlic paste and something called dragon's blood, which turns out to be red tree sap mixed with vinegar. A quirky tidbit, dragon's blood was actually traded widely in medieval apothecaries, believed to cure everything from ulcers to demonic possession. Your foot still throbs. Over the next few days, you see Lambert more often. He's always busy. Someone's got a boil or a blackened finger or a tooth that refuses to stay quiet. There's no end to his work. Some of it feels helpful. Some of it feels like a slow-motion horror show. Historians still debate whether barber surgeons were truly effective or just enthusiastic amateurs with sharp tools. And then there's the rituals. Not everything here is about cutting and pasting. Some believe in smoke healing, where dried herbs are burned in clay pots and the sick are bathed in the fumes. You try it once. The smoke makes your eyes water and your nose run, but afterward, you do feel different. Not better. Just different. Like you've been temporarily relocated to a very aggressive incense shop. Some mornings you wake to find strange symbols drawn in charcoal on the chapel's wooden beams. Maeve says they're protective runes. Thomas says they're curses. Jacques says it's just Edric being weird again. No one really knows. But no one wipes them off. Then there's the relics. The chapel houses a knucklebone said to belong to Saint Lazarus, the patron saint of lepers. People pray to it daily. They leave offerings, wilted herbs, coins, even a hand-sewn sock. You're not sure if the bone is real or if it belonged to someone named Larry, not Lazarus. But when you're desperate, a holy toe bone might be your best bet. In the rare moments you feel almost well when your fever dips or your foot stops pulsing, you catch glimpses of something unexpected, pride. People here still sing. They still tell stories. They argue about whether apples are better cooked or raw. One man insists he once saw a unicorn near the monastery wall. No one believes him, but no one stops him either. Why would they? Your place in this strange ecosystem is slowly settling. You're no longer the new one. Now you're just another bell, another robe, another shadow at evening prayers. And as terrifying as that sounds, it's starting to feel almost bearable, but only almost. You're not sure when it happens, but one morning you wake up and realize something unsettling. You care who sits where during prayers. You bristle when someone takes your spot by the chapel door. You roll your eyes when Jacques mutters over Brother Edric's sermon. And when Maeve offers her special salve again, you want to tell her that whatever she's using smells like wet sheep. Congratulations, you've become a leper colony local. This place, which once felt like exile, now has structure. Not comfort exactly, but rules. And more surprisingly, ranks. Turns out, even in a community of society's outcasts, there's still a hierarchy. The colony is like a tiny kingdom of the forgotten, and it's very clear who holds power. Spoiler, it's not you. At the top is Jacques Big Loud, and always carrying a stick. Not an official leader, but no one argues with a guy who once broke up a fight using only a ladle. He organizes labor duties, decides who works the garden, and somehow always ends up with the least wormy turnips at dinner. Beneath him is Agatha, the onion-chopping, one-eyed force of nature. She runs the kitchen like a military campaign, and if you bring in wet firewood, she'll banish you to cabbage peeling for a week. Then there's Brother Edric, technically above everyone in spiritual terms, but practically, it's complicated. His sermons are long, his prayers longer, and most people only show up because the chapel is the only place with a roof that doesn't leak. Still, when someone dies, Edric gets the final word. And in a place like this, that means something. Where do you fall? Somewhere between newcomer and don't mess things up. You've been promoted to the herb drying team, which is slightly better than hauling compost. You share duties with an older man named Leo, who insists that Rosemary keeps away bad thoughts. You don't believe him, but you still rub it on your wrists anyway. Social dynamics here are subtle but brutal. Share too much bread, and you're a saint. Share too little, and you're a miser. Gossip wins you allies, but too much gets you a cold shoulder. One quirky tidbit: some colonies actually created written rulebooks outlining behavior. No fighting, no swearing, and no taking more than your fair share. Yours doesn't have a book, but it definitely has unspoken laws. For instance, 1. Don't touch Jacques' spoon. 2. Don't sing louder than Brother Edric. 3. Always pretend Maeve's potions work. Even in this broken place, people find ways to maintain dignity, or at least competition. One man spends hours carving a walking stick that he can barely lift. Another insists on polishing his belt buckle every morning, despite not wearing trousers. It's absurd and endearing. Humans can find pride in the strangest corners. Historians still argue whether this social order brought peace or more suffering. Some accounts describe leper colonies as havens of compassion. Others paint them as pressure cookers of resentment and despair. You'd say it's a bit of both. There are moments of kindness, like the night Agatha left soup by your bed because you couldn't walk, or when Leo recited a prayer for your foot and slipped you the softest mat. But there's also tension. Maeve once hissed at a woman for hoarding a clean rag. Jacques broke up a shouting match over who got the last bit of honey. Living here means being watched, weighed, and quietly judged, all by people with their own decaying fingers in the communal pot. And yet, you start to belong. Not because you're healed, not because you're happy, but because the rhythms are familiar. The smell of damp wool, the whistle of the wind between chapel stones, the way the evening light falls across the graves near the fence. No one chooses this life. But you're learning that even here, humans build little kingdoms, crooked, crumbling, and bell-ringing kingdoms where everyone still wants to matter. You just hope you don't rise in rank the usual way, by outliving the others. You haven't seen an outsider in weeks. Not really. A few figures on horseback have passed by the outer road, heads turned deliberately away. A friar came once, dropped a sack of hard bread at the gate, crossed himself so aggressively it looked like an exorcism, and galloped off before anyone could say, Amen. Contact with the world beyond the fence is rare, and when it happens, deeply awkward. It's like watching someone wave to a ghost. You exist, technically, but from a safe, respectable distance. On this particular day, the air smells like rain and sheep dung, pretty standard, honestly, when someone spots a wagon approaching from the west. The call goes up fast, merchant. Half the colony stirs like ants poked with a stick. A crowd gathers at the boundary gate, the one made of half-rotted wood and very determined vines. Jacques is already there, arms crossed. The merchant doesn't get down. No one ever does. His wagon is stacked with sacks and crates, but he stands far above them, swaddled in layers of cloth and suspicion. He doesn't speak at first, just tosses a small bag of dried peas onto the dirt. You're expected to fetch it, or fight for it, or both. Then he announces loudly, oil, herbs, cloth payment, in coin, dried fish, or your cured pelts. Jacques barters, with a voice that could part clouds. The rest of you hang back watching like children at the edge of a feast you're not allowed to attend. No one dares approach unless waved over. That's the unspoken rule. Lepers don't negotiate. They wait. Sometimes they beg. Eventually you get your turn to shuffle forward and exchange 2 fish bones and a handful of mint leaves for a cracked comb and a candle stump. Victory. Back in the compound, people crowd around the goods like it's Christmas. Agatha lands a spool of thread. Maeve scores a small pouch of saffron, which she insists is medicinal. Thomas gets nothing and sulks for hours. You start to realize how bizarre this dynamic is, like a colony of shipwrecked souls, signaling passing vessels with smelly herbs and fevered hopes. Historians still argue whether merchants came out of duty, pity, or pure profit. Maybe all 3. But they never linger. Letters sometimes arrive delivered by boys paid to run between towns. But most are left unread, tossed into the dirt with a long stick. Some colonies insisted on fumigating all correspondence over hot coals. Others just assumed everything was cursed and left it to rot. You receive no letters. Not that you expected any. But watching Maeve read hers carefully, lips trembling, one knuckle pressed to her lip, you feel a strange, hollow sensation. Was there someone out there who once thought of you? A friend? A sibling? A market vendor who smiled at your jokes? Some here try to write back. They wrap their letters in cloth and press them with wax that doesn't stick. Brother Edric writes to a bishop monthly. The letters never get a reply. He sends them anyway. One quirky tidbit: in some parts of medieval Europe, lepers were legally dead, declared so by church or crown. Their possessions were seized, their spouses remarried, and they were buried in absentia. You could be very much alive, yet your name already carved on a headstone back home. Sometimes a priest visits. Not Edric, a real one from a distant parish, wearing layers of scented cloth and a face like someone breathing through soup. He stands behind the gate and reads scripture while keeping a torch lit as if divine flame might ward off your breath. You try to listen. You really do. But it's hard to absorb spiritual encouragement while he's holding a pomander ball to his nose like you're all a bad cheese. As night falls, you lie on your mat and watch a moth flit around the candle stub you bartered for. It flickers, small and unsteady, but beautiful in its own way. The outside world feels impossibly far, not just in miles, but in memory, like a dream from a past life. A street corner, a market bell, someone calling your name with laughter in their voice. That version of you is gone. But this one bell-robe candlelight and all is still here, still breathing, still stubbornly alive. It starts with a rumor. Whispers passed between cracked lips and wheezing lungs someone saw a miracle. You don't believe it, not at first. This place runs on superstition and stale bread. Miracles are stories people tell themselves to make sour soup taste sweeter. But by the next morning, everyone's buzzing. A woman from the far hovel Edith with the milky eye and the hands like tree bark claims her sores have closed overnight. No more pus. No more pain. She lifts her sleeve like Moses parting the sea, revealing skin that is, you admit, oddly pink and smooth. Everyone gasps. Brother Edric weeps. Jacques mutters, "We'll see." Word spreads fast. Suddenly people are praying louder, walking straighter, drinking Maeve's potions with actual enthusiasm. The chapel is packed. Even Thomas shows up, and he once described sermons as longer than death itself. You want to be skeptical. You are skeptical. But you also want to believe. Because what else is there? So you find yourself standing in the candlelit chapel one foggy evening, whispering to the toe bone of St. Lazarus like it might lean in and answer. You say your name slowly. You list your symptoms. You ask for help. You don't even realize you're crying until your cheeks feel cold. Some start preparing for a pilgrimage. Not out of the colony, could no one would let them. But within it. A small group circles the chapel barefoot, chanting prayers and psalms. They carry crosses made from fence posts and sing until their throats bleed. It's not exactly soothing, but it's sincere. Historians still argue whether these acts of devotion were encouraged or quietly tolerated by the church. On one hand, lepers were considered spiritual elite. Their suffering made them closer to God. On the other hand, letting them gather in large groups singing about divine cures that risked hope. And hope was dangerous. Edric leans into it fully. He announces a special procession calling it the Cleansing Walk. Everyone's expected to attend. You spend the entire next morning helping Agatha braid rosemary into garlands. Maeve applies a salve of honey and ash to your wrists. She says it'll protect you from jealousy. Miracles like Edith's don't happen without envy biting at the heels. The procession winds through every corner of the colony. The bell rings constantly tied now to your waist, swaying with each step. Some of the residents are too ill to walk, so they're wheeled along on carts. Others lean on Styx walls or each other. The air is thick with incense and damp wool. Edric shouts blessings in Latin. You pretend to understand. You feel a flutter in your chest, like something might lift you just for a moment out of your skin. That night, someone lights a fire near the edge of the grave field. They throw herbs into it and dance slowly around the flames. You watch from a distance, unsure whether this is devotion or desperation. But honestly, what's the difference? You dream of your hands healing, of the robe falling away, of the gate opening and no one recoiling. In your dream, you eat fruit so fresh it drips down your chin. You laugh, and no one turns to stare. But in the morning, the lesions are still there, still red, still weeping. Your foot still aches. Your hands still tremble. The miracle didn't choose you. Edith, for what it's worth, relapses a week later. The skin cracks again. The sores return. She screams at the chapel wall, throws the rosemary garland into the mud, and refuses to speak for 2 days. No one says miracle after that. Not for a while. But belief is stubborn. It survives the disappointment. People still stop at the chapel to whisper their names. They still brush the bone with their sleeves. They still light candles even when the wind keeps blowing them out. And you start to understand. In a place where no one comes and no one leaves, hope isn't naive. It's fuel. Rain again. Of course. It's like the sky has developed a personal grudge. You wake to the sound of it dripping through a new hole in the thatch roof right onto your ankle. A gentle, wet tap. Over and over, like a leaky hourglass, marking time in reverse. But today is different. The chapel bell doesn't ring for prayers. It rings slowly, once, twice, then stops. That rhythm only means one thing. Someone's died. You rise joints stiff and pull on your robe. The cold has set in deep this week. The kind of cold that makes you feel brittle, like one wrong step, and something inside might crack. Outside the colony is quiet. Not mournful, just routine. Death isn't shocking here. It's Thursday. Jacques is already at the burial plot with a shovel. You think about pretending to limp harder to get out of helping, but honestly everyone already knows you're faking a little. So you go. The graves lie just beyond the fence under the crooked tree that hasn't grown a new leaf since you arrived. It leans at an angle that somehow mirrors everyone's backs. The soil is muddy and full of rocks. You spend the morning digging. The grave is shallow because deep is impossible. There's no strength left in any of you for that. Brother Edric arrives wrapped in a cloak so threadbare it flaps like a tired bird. He leads the prayer while the body is brought out. It's wrapped in cloth, tied with twine. You don't ask who it is until you see the shoes. It's Leo, the rosemary guy. The one who always smelled like soup and told that same story about the singing donkey. He died in his sleep, they say. Peacefully. You hope it's true. You tell yourself it is. You lower him in. The cloth darkens in the rain. Edric says something about eternal rest, and for once he keeps it brief. Afterward, everyone leaves except you and Jacques. You stay to finish the burial, pressing the last of the dirt down with your foot gently. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does. Later, you sit in the chapel staring at the stone walls. You think about carving a name. Not Leo's. Yours. Just a first name. Just to see it. To prove you were here before you become another wrapped bundle, lowered into a hole by hands just as weak as yours are now. Jacques finds you there. He doesn't say much, just grunts and sits beside you. You sit in silence for a while, both of you watching the stub of a candle melt into a bowl of rainwater someone left behind. Then he says something unexpected. Make sure they spell your name right. You look at him. He doesn't smile, but it's the closest he's come to a joke in weeks. You both laugh just once. Quiet, rough, like something dug up. There's a shelf in the back of the chapel with carved wooden markers. Dozens of them. Some with names. Some with just crosses. Some with nothing at all. You run your hand along them sometimes. One day one will be yours. And yet in this strange way, that's... okay. You're not just a patient here. You're a part of something. A rhythm. A world inside a wall. Even as your body fails, your presence remains. You help dig. You help sing. You keep stories alive. Sometimes that's enough. Later, as you lie on your mat, the rain softens to a patter like fingers tapping a drum. Maeve snores. Thomas mumbles in his sleep. Outside, the wind turns the herbs to shivers, their leaves trembling but holding fast. You close your eyes, sore and stiff and impossibly tired. But not alone. The candlelight dims, now flickering into softness, shadows melting into each other. Like sleep, pulling at the edges of your thoughts. The scent of damp earth lingers, but it's no longer jarring. It's just the scent of quiet things settling of a night, folding gently over worn shoulders. The bells have stopped ringing. The firewood crackles low. And outside the fence, the world turns unaware of your tiny corner, carved in faith, pain, and persistence. You've made it through a day, maybe a little more. Not triumphant, but steady, breathing. Still you. And somehow in this hidden place of sorrow and silence that counts for something. So let your breath slow, your muscles soften, your thoughts wander to simpler moments. Green fields. A warm bowl of broth, your name spoken with kindness. You're still here, still dreaming. Sweet dreams.